Richard, over to you.
Good morning. Richard Anthony Bennett, Managing Director of Magic Enterprises.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of those remarks, we'll invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking today. My name is Richard Bennett. I'm the Managing Director of Magic Enterprises. We're a small family-owned business that has been operating for close to 50 years, of which I've been a part of for the last 30. We currently represent 9 franchises over 4 locations and employ approximately 100 people. The AADA has asked me if I'd be happy to speak today. When looking at the terms of reference for the committee, I was more than happy to talk from my own point of view. There is a definite power imbalance between the car manufacturer and the dealer. In a large amount of cases, there is a professional relationship that works well and benefits the manufacturer, the dealer, and the customer. When this is broken or there is a different direction to be taken, the manufacturer holds all the cards and can have little regard for the dealer or its customers. It is my opinion that only a mandatory code of conduct will ensure that this relationship is not abused. The problem we have is all manufacturers are now overseas-based businesses. The boardroom overseas may not be too concerned about our business or our relationship in Australia, or ultimately it is governed by its returns. Many managing directors and chief executive officers are now international postings for a very short period. Their goal is to be noticed for the next posting, as Australia can now be seen as a training ground. The government has developed a set of voluntary principles that simply will not work. A colleague of mine asked yesterday why I was speaking to you today, saying this could only put a target on my back with no benefit to me personally. My answer was, the industry is a fantastic one, and I can see this disappearing. A lot of decisions are being made for a short-term gain and not in the best interest of the long-term future of the Australian car market, the people and the customers that it serves, employs and represents. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. Before I hand over to others for questions, I'm just going to begin by asking one myself. Mr. Bennett, Holden's departure means that there's no longer an Australian manufacturer who's part of that manufacturing relationship. Does the departure of Holden have a particular impact on that dynamic, in that historically it would have been, I guess, notable that there was a close relationship or a symbiotic relationship between dealers and between Holden dealers and the manufacturer in terms of the brand and the impact if those relationships were poor on that brand. But now that Holden is departing and has gone, it seems to me that that power dynamic is exacerbated. Could you comment on that for me, please?
Yes, I think that's true. It probably has highlighted the issue that we're going to face and that we have been facing for probably the past 5 years. Holden obviously was one of the last. If you go back 5 to 10 years ago, Holden, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Toyota, Ford, all had manufacturing bases of some shape in Australia, and they have now all gone. So Holden leaving Australia, while the majority of the cars were towards the end coming in from an overseas area, what that has ultimately done is the culture of the Australian car market has now gone. And in a lot of instances, you're dealing with international CEOs, as I said in my address, that don't know Australia, don't know how we operate, don't know our culture from a working point of view, a loyalty point of view. And that's a real issue because they are very big, powerful companies, and in the wrong hands or with the wrong direction, they can destroy small business. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It does. It's indeed very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. May I ask Senator McGrath or Senator O'Neill, which one of you
Senator O'Neill,
would like to call?
Thank you very much, Senator
Thank
McGrath. Thank you for coming today to put your experience on the record, and I think it is very instructive that, Mr. Bennett, did you describe that you have 9 brands that you interact with?
Throughout our group, correct, we do.
Great. And you were, I think, echoing comments that have been made earlier that across the brands there seems to be a variation in some acting in a way that most Australians would consider very highly professional and ethical. I think you said in the power imbalance that those who act professionally benefit the manufacturer, the dealer and the customer. But others are acting in other ways, which I can only consider must be unprofessional, that advantage the manufacturer but cost the dealer and cost the customer. So given your experience across that sector, your evidence will be very important to us. Before I go to my first question, can I just restate something to give you comfort and also to signal very clearly to any of those 9 companies that you engage with or other companies that you might seek to engage with, that the Chair made the comment reminding all witnesses that giving evidence to this committee is protected by parliamentary privilege and that it is unlawful, right? Not just bad form or unprofessional, it is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee. And any such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. So I just want to put those words on the record to give you some comfort, Mr. Bennett. Thank you for your courage in coming forward, which has been acknowledged by your own colleagues who understand that power is at play very much in the sector. So in recent media reports, it appears that Renault is leaving Australia and will be appointing an independent distributor, Ateco. Is this correct?
Yes, correct. I am a Renault dealer as well, and we were notified officially from Renault yesterday, but most of the reports started circling about a week ago, Friday week ago, and was printed in the press and confirmed by some people within the organisation, but only non-official, that on Monday that they looked like they were leaving Australia. But the staff are Renault and the dealers were only notified yesterday morning.
So you've talked about professionalism and a lack of professionalism in certain contexts. I'd have to consider that most people would think that was a pretty unprofessional thing to do. There are 60-odd Renault dealerships across Australia. Is that correct, Mr. Bennett?
It is correct, and they're not leaving Australia. They have sold their Australian business to a distributor within Australia.
So how did it feel finding out about the change, which I'm going to ask you to describe its impact on your business as well, but how did you feel about finding out about the change through the media and being advised so late in the piece directly?
That's just unprofessional the way it happened. I appreciate that businesses buy and sell, and there's a commercial arrangement and some confidentiality that needs to be upheld there. But the fact that Renault made no contact with the dealers, the dealer council, until a week after the media was circulating the sale details, just unprofessional, and the dealers are hurt and scared, a lot of them. I mean, their livelihoods are on the line. It's probably the impact of what the sale has had over the last 18 months where I've probably felt it the most.
Okay, so dealers are hurt, and we think it was impolite, etc., in terms of the notification, but you said scared. Why are dealers scared?
Car dealers, in the majority or in a large part, private family-owned businesses. They have mortgages on their house. They have everything they own up for grabs from their financiers and their banks. And while a lot of people see them as very large businesses, they're large turnover businesses, not necessarily large businesses with large bottom lines. And a manufacturer possibly pulling the rug from under a dealership or not understanding what our future lies would scare anyone. I mean, we've got everything on their lives. Our kids' future, everything we own is somewhere tied up in a guarantee. So if you have no income, it's very hard to make the payments.
So you're describing a pretty high-risk situation where all the power resides with no real financial risk to the manufacturer, and that's all being carried by Australian businesses such as yourself, who employs 100 people.
Correct. And I believe that's where the code of conduct is being asked for, because traditionally, where we go back to the start, that we had the manufacturers all within Australia, everyone was working to the same end game, and that was delivering a car to the Australian public with a good experience, and you had certainty with your dealer agreements. I mean, 10 years ago, we had what you called an evergreen agreement with a lot of manufacturers, which meant as long as you didn't do anything that was commercially incorrect, fraudulent, your agreement continued to bowl along. So you're in charge of your own destiny. Now they are very much a timed dealer agreement. And in the majority of the investment that we make as dealers is physically impossible to get back in one term of a dealer term, which is traditionally 3 to 5 years. The businesses are very large. There's a lot of money that's invested and a very slow return. So if a manufacturer was to leave, like in the Holden case, fear is a fair word. It's scary of how you're going to be able to pay out your staff, your entitlements, pay the cars out, because without the sign out the front, ultimately you don't have a business.
So the period of time that you've talked about where there's been this erosion from the confidence of an evergreen agreement to timed agreements has destabilised the businesses of Australian small and family businesses in the sector. Is that correct?
Certainly, yes.
And during that period of time, there has been a code that's been floating around. Has that provided the protection that the sector needed from the power of these big international companies?
No. A voluntary code of conduct works for the 98% of people that don't need it. So the 2 to 3 to 5% of people that do need a code of conduct, the word voluntary doesn't really come into it.
So your suggestion, if I can just ask you to put in your own words, you did mention the word mandatory. There seems to be quite a degree of fear about doing that, bringing in a mandatory code from Mr Morrison and Miss Andrews with regard to the sector. They have advanced another voluntary code at the end of last year. What's your message to Mr Morrison and Miss Andrews about the effectiveness of the voluntary codes in this sector?
Again, a voluntary code will work for the majority of situations, but when you have a business that has its own agenda, or more importantly, one person within that business, the managing director or the CEO of that car manufacturer that has come in to prove themselves, they can do a lot of disruption on many small businesses within a very short period of time. And that is something that needs some protection. It really is a David and Goliath type operation where we have to, as a car dealer, try to keep the relationship between us and the manufacturer. And there are certain requests that in some opinions may be even unlawful, but there isn't any arbitration, there isn't anywhere that we can go when this occurs. And to say that it's a commercial reason and we can go to the courts, that's financially not viable for a small car dealership where a large manufacturer can do this. So what I'd say to Mr Morrison is, I understand that we don't want to put rules in for the one-offs, but this is no longer the one-offs. It's happening more and more where manufacturers worldwide in Australia are taking very short-term commercial decisions that will affect the ability of the car dealerships and the car manufacturers within Australia to trade, profitably, but keep Australians employed. We don't want to get back to an industry where it's governed or owned by only a small amount of car manufacturers, and we don't have a choice even as Australians.
So your plea really is for jobs, as well as the small businesses that create those jobs, for Mr Morrison and Miss Andrews to institute a mandatory code so that, you know, for layman's terms, if the relationship ends up coming asunder for some reason, if there's a divorce perhaps of the relationship between the manufacturer and the car distributor and your business, that there's somewhere to go to get that resolved, because it doesn't exist at the minute, does it?
No, it doesn't, and somewhere to go to get that resolved at a reasonable time frame as well as a reasonable price tag.
Because the price tag as it currently is, what happens?
The majority of dealers couldn't afford to have the argument with a manufacturer. It's millions of dollars, and for small businesses, they just don't have that. So there needs to be that protection from that point, from a car dealership point of view. But I must say, it's not about having a avenue to have an argument just for the sake of having an argument. We're talking about the one-off cases, but the one-off cases are happening a lot more often and will happen a lot more in the future, as everything is now becoming just about the bottom line. And someone in Europe, someone in Asia, someone in America does not care about the Australian bottom line or the car dealer that is sitting in regional Victoria or regional Western Australia or Metro Western Australia or Metro Victoria. They look at one bottom line, and if they can make a change for the next 2 years, then they don't care about a 10-year cycle.
So we need the government to stand up for businesses and for Australian consumers. Can I just ask if over the past few years there's been any indication from Renault that, to you, that they were planning such a significant change?
Personally, yes, there has been. The way they've been operating the business over the past 2 years wouldn't be how you would normally operate a business that you were looking at moving forward with. I had a conversation with the managing director of Renault myself about 9 months ago, asking why they were leaving Australia, if they were leaving Australia. I was guaranteed that they weren't. I was guaranteed that there was no changes happening, but there was a tidy up going on within the organisation at the detriment to the dealer network over the past 12 months. And it was very obvious yesterday when the decision came out that something had been afoot.
So they pretty well lied to you when you asked direct questions about this change of business. Can you give us an idea of the level of investment involved in running a franchise new car dealership? To
run a small 30-odd car a month franchise is approximately about $300,000 a month in expenses, so somewhere around $3 to $4 million a year. And that's just to pay your interest on your loans, etc. You would have about somewhere, if you had to set it up from scratch, you would have somewhere near $5 to $10 million investment, depending on the cost of the land of where you were setting up. But you'd have somewhere in the vicinity of $3 million worth of vehicle stock, new car stock. And as I was saying, 5 years or a 3-year term with no security is almost impossible to be able to get any dent in your investment.
That's a very significant amount of money, and Australians who sort of drive past these every day know that they're big but wouldn't have a sense of the scale. And also you just look and you see the signs, you see the cars, you don't realise that there's 100 or 200 people that are relying on this business. And losing a regional motor trader is a big hit in a regional town, we know that. In terms of the Melville franchise, I understand you have the franchise for Renault in Melville, is that correct?
That is correct.
How much, if I can ask you, Mr. Bennett, have you invested in that particular site for Renault?
Oh, over the years, it would be well in excess of $10 million in running the business, but just setting up the business, the Renault part of this business sits on probably somewhere around a $6 to $7 million piece of dirt. And we've also done the showroom, the signage. We've spent a lot of money on the Renault brand.
Is it at risk now, Mr. Bennett?
It'd be nice to know. I was told in a press conference, which I couldn't ask any personal questions. I was only allowed to type them in, but I'm told it's not. But I've got a 5-minute press conference yesterday to tell me that it's business as usual. So I'll have to take that on.
What could only be described as deceptive communications with Renault in recent months as well. So there's not exactly a trust currency there, is there?
Not a lot, no, that's correct.
I'm sure that your employees will be very distressed about this as well. If it were to cease operation, how many people would have their jobs threatened in Melville?
30.
That's a lot of families.
That's just the immediate people that work directly on the payroll. If that was to go, there would be another 50 local businesses that we use for subcontracting that would lose work as well.
That is very, very concerning, and I do hope that Minister Andrews and Mr Morrison can actually do something to help these Australian businesses that are providing so many great jobs. Clearly, it's very important to have an open and transparent relationship with the dealers and be advised in sufficient time. How much time would you have needed really to accommodate the change that was announced yesterday?
Well, we still don't know what that is for Renault. So the issue that we have, Renault, as I said, isn't leaving Australia. They've sold it to a distributor. So we don't know what that change is. We have current dealer agreements that if everything is above board, should be operating for the next 2 to 3 years, depending on dealers around Australia. And I believe the purchaser of Renault will be honouring those agreements. That's as far as we've been told. It is very, very fresh. But from a code of conduct point of view, it's probably the lead up to the leaving or the selling of Australia or the changing of a dealer network that is where the rule book needs to be, because it's very easy to run down stock, run down people's businesses over 12 months to get your own backyard in order while other businesses in the dealer network carry the pain. And I suppose that's where we need some sort of avenue that we can put a complaint into, because at the moment they fall on deaf ears.
Right. So again, that's a plea for a mandatory application of a point of arbitration where matters can be resolved. I note that I have a copy of a letter dated the 13th of November, Mr Bennett. That is the first letter of non-performance, and I just want to table that for the committee. And I thank you for bringing this to our attention, because we have had some evidence in previous hearings where there seemed to be some wordplay about ending contracts and non-performance letters, and it seemed to me that there was a sort of a use of different metrics to hide what was really going on behind the scenes. So I'm trying to ask these questions to flesh out how a non-performance letter is abused as a form of power that kind of sits alongside or just outside a dismissal or a clean break of the relationship. So you've got this one. What does it mean? What does it mean when you get a letter like this, Mr Bennett?
On its own merits, it could mean that, look, we need you to do better, we want to work with you, and we're just putting it in writing so we can get some formulated plan to get a better result out of your area. what it could mean, and that's sort of what it hides behind. In my opinion, this particular letter was sent to myself, and there was several other dealers in Australia that received it. I made a few phone calls, and the majority of people that I spoke to were also sitting with one of these letters. And it can be used as building a file or building a book. So because if they wanted to change or they wanted to lessen the amount of dealers or change the way that they're doing business, it may be easier to terminate a dealer for poor performance, whether that is true or false, than have to go through any other means of changing their dealer network. So it's a bully letter in a lot of its instances. So it's the schoolyard bully that hides behind the playground and asks for your lunch money. It's not how you do business. I received this letter without one phone call, any previous emails. It just came out of the blue. 3 months earlier, I was runner-up National Dealer of the Year, so I must have been going okay. And then I received the letter. I was achieving my targets. The month after this letter, I'd achieved 130 odd percent. I think it was 133% of my target. I got 130% of my target for that quarter. The issue is someone just said, let's write some letters. And this is where the bully comes in. I spoke to one dealer who didn't want me to name them that was on a second letter for non-performance, but the metrics were all wrong. It wasn't a fair letter. And I believe that Renault was using this as whether or not it was to build a file. At the time, I believed they were up to something, and I thought they may have been leaving Australia. And I thought they may have been just building a file to try and terminate some dealers so they wouldn't have to do any payouts, as in with the Holden case. They were definitely up to something, hence why I had a solicitor write a reply, because when they get their big fancy lawyers and they want to take you on, as I said, there's no board or nowhere we can go, and they produce a file that individually are harmless and then put together that has been collected over a period of time can look damning.
So thank you very much for your evidence, and I think a bully letter was one of the most eloquent descriptors of what this is. So for people who aren't in the industry, basically, what's the advantage really for the manufacturer to do this? What financial benefit and what business benefit do they get by constructing a file determined to make your business look bad? Where's the advantage to them?
The word bully is a good one because it's a continual threat. So to have dealers on notice like this, if a manufacturer then wants you to buy extra stock because they have too much old stock or too much stock in their own, they can persuade a dealer to buy cars they simply just don't need, because the manufacturer makes their money when they sell them to us, not when we sell them to the public. So as long as they're off their books, so there's various reasons to keep a dealer under pressure to redo signage, to redo your premises. There's always a reason to keep the dealer. But this is the old school, the old sort of bully style tactics where some manufacturers would turn up to your office, have a conversation with you and run through a fair commercial reason on why this should be done. In Renault's case, in the past 18 months, that certainly isn't how they operate.
So you have a very valuable insight here where you're speaking up for the entire sector in Australia, because as you said, you've recently been the runner-up for national sales for Renault. So that would generally mean that you're a high-performing, successful business who has been in business with your family for 50 years and you personally for 30 years. So you've been around the block a few times, shall we say, Mr. Bennett. You know a thing or two about the industry.
We do, I do, and we have been here a long time and we are successful. And all manufacturers go through a cycle, and that's happening more and more. You get a brand new car out in the market and everyone wants one, and then slowly that car gets older over the 5 to 7 years. So as a dealer, your sales do fluctuate. And sure, we can have bad days, we can have staff issues like anybody else, but that's the relationship and you work through it. It's not the threat that's current that you're going to lose your business every time you have a bad day. And the majority of dealers are there, their livelihood's there. And I'm sure there are definitely dealers, and the bottom 5 or 10% of dealers need encouragement. Absolutely no doubt. It's just the mechanisms and how they're used for maybe the top 80% that need to be looked at. So
for me to understand this, the benefit of sending a letter like this is to threaten the car dealer to a point where they will agree to any terms and conditions that the manufacturer comes up with then, just so that they can keep their business alive.
That could be one reason why that letter was sent, and in my opinion, this particular letter was sent for that reason.
Can you give us you mentioned earlier some action and decisions by Renault in the recent times that have affected performance of the brand in the market. Could you give us a bit of a background on that?
I can. There's a new managing director that arrived, and all of the decisions have seemed a little bit different from a dealer point of view over the past sort of 12 to 18 months. It's been a bit of a funny ride, and as a genuine partnership, we need to help clear Renault's old stock and clear any problems that Renault have themselves. I mean, we're meant to be in it together. But there seems to be a very large focus on clearing their own stock and not worrying about whether a dealer has sold those cars, or can profitably sell those cars. It seems to be, over the last 12 to 18 months, a very one-way relationship. But what came out this week, you can understand why.
So today, the recent developments reveal that perhaps this person was sent by an overseas manufacturer to change the way Renault's operating in Australia and organise their business of Renault in a way that advantages that manufacturer, but at an ongoing cost over the last 18 months in terms of business stability to Australian dealers.
Correct. I personally believe the particular managing director that has come to Renault of recent times has come purely and simply with a direction of doing something with the business, whether that was closing, leaving Australia, or selling the business, which is the best option for all Renault dealers and their staff, has come to make that sale as clean and as easy as possible from Renault's point of view. But this was at the detriment to the dealers. In December, every Renault dealer in Australia had immense pressure on selling every vehicle they had in stock, whether it was to a customer or not, reporting it as a sold car. In some forums they're called cyber cars, so they're not really sold, but they sort of appear as sold. There was a huge pressure to get rid of cars, whether they were sold or not. And
when a car is not sold, that would be a car that you've purchased and is sitting on your lot as perhaps people might know it as a demonstrator. Is that correct?
Correct. That would be one way as a demonstrator, or just a new car that has been R8. So by R8, it's been advised to the government that it is now in the market. The warranty has started on the car, and the dealer is still holding that car, and it hasn't been sold to the customer. So the issue with that, from our point of view, from a dealer's point of view, is we had to participate in a program for this to happen, because there was incentives put on for us to take the cars, and if you don't take that car, you and your customer is at a disadvantage to the dealer next door. So why you would do that as a manufacturer, I have no idea unless your financial year runs from January to December and you're trying to make your accounts look better than they really are, or B, you're selling your business or moving your business and you don't want to be stuck with any stock, but then the dealers will be caught with the stock.
So it sounds like there's a fair bit of colour and movement, shall we say, going on in the background there in terms of accounting and dealing behind the scenes. I note in your opening comment you said, it's fair enough for people to be able to buy and sell businesses. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's been no transparency about what's been going on. It has material impact, can cost businesses their existence and through them lots of jobs in the community. Is the letter that you received that's now tabled on the 13th of November from Renault, do you believe it's a potential precursor to you being put in a position to be possibly terminated?
I believe that would have been the case, that they were setting up the file in case that was the way they were going to go. Whether or not that letter gets transferred to a new buyer, I'm not sure. But I think that possibly there would be other dealers that have received that letter at the same time and the same set of rules is being used. So if they were to terminate any dealer, they can run with the line that, oh, well, hang on, we do this to everybody. It's, as I said, if it was a genuine letter, possibly the general sales manager would have rang me before it was sent. My local rep had been in with my dealer principal. No mention of poor performance. Quite the contrary. We had a letter, an email from Renault about a week earlier congratulating us on some of our performances. So
really?
It was very contradictory.
Mr. Bennett, would you mind sending that to the committee as well? Because this kind of disingenuous, unprofessional communication, 1 week saying this, the next week saying another, I think is a real sense of the instability that the overseas manufacturers, in this case Renault, are using to make that fear equation operate in the sector.
Correct. And as I said, a letter in this terminology sent by an upstanding manufacturer with the right intentions can be a great sales tool or a great business tool to work together to make sure your improvement and your performance is correct. It's when it's sent and used possibly in a malicious way that is where it all falls down. And that is why a voluntary code doesn't work.
So, to be clear, do you think manufacturers will abide by the voluntary principle guidelines that the government offered as the solution to this problem at the end of last year?
Only when it suits.
Sorry?
Only when it suits them, not when it doesn't suit them.
Okay. So if there's a point of conflict, the only answer is to have what sort of a code, Mr. Bennett?
We need a mandatory code and one that is easy to navigate. I suppose you called it like a divorce. If it is a divorce, there's some heated personalities, there's some hurt feelings. We need an avenue that we can discuss in a arbitration that is fair, and a dealer, if a manufacturer is wanting to make changes for various reasons, a dealer is fairly compensated. They put everything on the line to run their businesses, to try and get a return for themselves and their people and the community around us. We're important businesses. We're the sponsor of the local footy club. We're the sponsor of your local dance club. We're the sponsor of your local charity. We're all over our community and we try very hard to do the right thing, and we just need some protection from a manufacturer that has a malicious intent. And as I said, the majority of them are fantastic businesses until they want to change. And we just need some code that can protect us and the manufacturer can run a rule book by.
Can I just ask you about the targets? If you achieved your Renault sales targets, would your results have to be significantly above other dealers relatively?
Targets are a very difficult I've been in the industry 30 years and I'm still not quite sure how they work them out. It's a bit like trying to tell my son at the moment to get an ATAR score, which I don't know how it's calculated. The targets are sometimes pulled out of thin air, and this is where it has nothing to do with the marketplace. Somebody in an office over in a head office in Asia or Europe, depending on what your manufacturer is, gives Australia a target of X, Y, Z, maybe 10,000 units or 20,000 units. And then they try and divide it into a dealership. So my target then works out to be 100 units. It doesn't matter if it's raining, if there's COVID. They say you should sell 100 cars, whether it's possible or not. So it's a very, very hard metric from a dealer to achieve, and a very easy one for a manufacturer to be able to manage a dealer if they aren't happy with it or don't want to be happy with the dealer's performance.
Mr. Bennett, can you negotiate targets with Renault if they get it wrong?
Absolutely. We can try, but the answer is generally no. We received a target in January. I've got an email chain going back from my dealer principal to Renault, going back from early December. Still hasn't had a response. We're now in February. That there are no cars in Australia. Renault hasn't been ordering any cars. We have no cars in dealer stock. Have a target that we can't achieve. So technically I can receive another letter this month saying that my January performance wasn't up to date because they have no cars.
So they're asking you to sell something that they cannot put in your car yard. And if you don't sell the car that they don't provide to you, which is absolutely an impossible task, they then have grounds to terminate you on a poor performance basis. Is that correct, Mr. Bennett?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely correct. And there is no code to say that they can't.
Right. So to be clear, and this is just my last thoughts, and please correct me if I'm wrong. At the moment, the government has decided that they just want to let the market rip. All of the manufacturers are overseas. You said that we've lost Holden, Nissan, Mitsubishi and Toyota in the last 5 years, so there's no Australian knowledge of the market. And we have reached a point now where overseas companies like Renault can set targets for you to sell cars that they can't even provide to you and use that as a trigger to take out your business, which is invested in the millions of dollars and employs hundreds of people. And your request of the government is give us a mandatory code so we can negotiate and survive. Is that really what you want, Mr. Bennett?
Correct. That's all. We just want a fair playing field. When the water turns rough, we just need an avenue and a fair playing field that the dealers and our businesses are protected from potential overseas bullies that have no interest in what we do.
Are you aware of the evidence that the committee received in our last hearing from the US about how each of the states in the US went about constructing protective legislation to address this problem over there? Are you aware of that evidence or of the situation in the US, Mr. Bennett?
Not fully aware of it. I do understand it in touch.
Yeah, so that was the evidence that we received, that the American government, state by state, got the picture and provided protection to keep jobs on the ground and protect the businesses that needed the protection. We need the government here to do the same thing.
100%. It's extreme, but possibly if it was all to do with a short-term gain, we could have one or two cars to choose from and the rest could be gone. We can't have these manufacturers choosing to come and go or reduce the size of dealerships without some open consultation and then a fair compensation. So a dealership can actually pay out its staff, pay out its entitlements and look after its customers. It can turn very ugly with the wrong people in charge.
Why do you think this Liberal National Party government is ignoring your requests for this assistance?
You'd have to ask them for that one. I don't quite understand.
We do try and question time, Mr. Bennett, but we don't get many answers that tell us much.
I'm assuming I've
O'Neill.
been a bit busy of late, but we just would like someone to listen and maybe have a closer look.
Well, I'll certainly.
Thank you,
label
Senator
for Friday. Thank
O'Neill.
you. Thanks, Chair.
I've just got one
Thanks, Mr.
last question for you, Mr. Bennett. Can I ask, please, in the context, you spoke about how a importer and a manufacturer can push the risk onto the dealer. Can I ask, in the context of things like Australian consumer law and also the financial risks attached to that, if there are issues with, for example, a warranty or a particular fault that's systemic in a car that's discovered, what are the kind of circumstances where the onus of who bears the risk is particularly important, not just to the dealer but also to the consumer?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
So you talked about, and we can move on if we need to. You talked about the broker taking, if you've got a broker who's in the middle, who's buying cars and selling them into the Australian market, they might have some financial risk attached to that because they've got to buy the cars and then sell them to you. But clearly the dynamic in how a car is serviced, looked after, and whether it meets the manufacturer's specifications and safety standards, etc., is not something that's easily dealt with by those middle companies, if you like. It's the dealer that sold the car, so they hold the obligation under Australian consumer law, and of course the manufacturer holds that obligation as well.
Yeah, so how it currently works is the manufacturer sells us a car, obviously, we then sell it to the end user. If there is a warranty issue, the end user will come back to the dealership and then we have to put a claim back into the manufacturer for a reimbursement of that warranty, where we do it with some manufacturers at a fair rate, some have a lower rate of warranty, and we then have to wait 60 to 90 days in some instances to be paid for that. If that manufacturer was to leave Australia, it is my understanding under Australian law that they have to honour that warranty arrangement for the term of the vehicle, as well as, I believe, 10 years to carry parts within Australia for the customers.
So if hypothetically there was some kind of systemic issue and it was a driver enough for a manufacturer to go, okay, well, there's a big liability here now, we're just going to leave the car dealers to mop this up. Without something like a mandatory code of conduct, what reach does Australia have to ensure that consumers and are actually looked after, and that the whole liability doesn't rest with dealers? Because it'd be quite difficult, frankly, if it is a systemic issue, for dealers to deal with that by themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that question, Senator. How the Australian government or the government departments would deal with that manufacturer overseas. If a manufacturer was to do that, I don't actually understand how that warranty would be paid. I must say, I don't believe any manufacturer that I know of in the current situations would abandon Australian customers like that. I would hope not anyway.
Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you very much for your very useful evidence this morning. And you're welcome to continue to listen online. And well, you can hang up and then rejoin in terms of listening to us online. I'd now like to